These new prosecution allegations about Rex Heuermann were all part of a single document that was submitted to the judge in this case, part of what the DA has called the ebb and flow of a case that will go to trial this fall.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't hear. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, thoughts build up until I can't hear.
Bizarre details in a new court filing involving accused Gilgo Beach serial killer Rex Heuermann.
We are learning the lengths prosecutors say the suspect went to meet sex workers. ABC.
First principles, Clarice. Simplicity. Read Marcus Aurelius. Of each particular thing, ask, what is it in itself? What is its nature? What does he do, this man you seek?
Burner phones and aliases, online searches for some pretty hardcore and violent pornography that go back years before Rex Heuermann was arrested and charged with 7 murders on Long Island.
What is the first and principal thing he does? What needs does he serve by killing?
The documents, according to the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office, say that Rex Heuermann had significant contacts with at least 60 prostitutes whom he called hundreds of times in the 4 years prior to his arrest. He registered burner phones and a Tinder account under aliases like Andrew Roberts and Thomas Hawk to communicate with sex workers.
Sexual frustrations.
No, he covets. That is his nature. And how do we begin to covet, Clarice?
And he used a Gmail account to conduct thousands of searches related to pornography and sex workers. And prosecutors say the same Gmail address was used to conduct more than 100 searches related to the Gilgo Beach serial killings or other murders. Some of those searches were, why hasn't the Long Island serial killer been caught? Map of all known serial killers, and cops launch Gilgo Beach homicide investigation task force.
Now we begin by coveting what we see every day.
And what was the Long Island serial killer seeing every day? According to the New York Post, the hulking Massapequa Park architect who is on trial for allegedly killing 7 women routinely had sleazy interactions with at least 60 sex workers and routinely searched the internet for disturbing porn that showed women crying, bruised and impaled, according to court documents filed by the Suffolk County prosecutors last week. But look at those words: routinely had sleazy interactions, routinely searched the internet. Something else was going on in his life that was also routine. Something else was also going on that was regular in this person's life. And what was that? Whatever was routine and regular, that was Heuermann's coveting what he saw every day. And what did he see every day? Well, he saw his own home and his wife. And then he went to Manhattan and he saw the people there. And then he got back on the train and saw people on the train and went back home. According to the Post, Heuermann, who was a married father of 2, working in New York City at the time, used the name Andy on the popular dating app, the documents claimed. And what is this whole thing about creating these identities online? Well, it's playing games, playing fictitious games with people, pretending to be someone else, creating this whole world where someone treats you a certain way based on a fiction. But that was something else that he saw every day, Manhattan. And how could he stand up to these towering edifices? Could he stand up based on who he was, or did he have to pretend to be someone else or something else? By the way, I've visited Manhattan myself, and it's like no other place. Vertiginous, massive, empowering, very impressive. But if you're not careful, also intimidating, also disempowering. All of those erect structures speak of man's empire not only over this world, but over one another, man's empire over man. And did someone who was part of the design of this spectacular city, remember Rex Heuermann's an architect, did he feel like he was part of that empire?
And the answer is no!
Do you think he wanted to be part of it? And so this divide between what he wants and what he can't have, and who he is, creates a kind of a schizophrenia, a split, a contrast which is between who he is and who he wants to be, and who the people he desire him to be or need him to be. And there's a gap between the two. Just like there's an incredible split, an incredible contrast, a schizophrenia between his home life in Massapequa Park and his work life in glitzy Manhattan. That difference couldn't be more stark. I made that journey from his office in Midtown to his dilapidated house in Long Island and back via the Long Island Rail. And I've got to say, by the way, my father's a builder. He works with architects. I've known quite a few architects as well. I also studied in that area for some time. And that is the kind of house an architect should be ashamed of. And so how come he's staying in that house? And I think that was actually his mother's house, which shows a degree of enmeshment that's also quite interesting here. But basically, the Long Island Rail stops within about a mile or two of his home in the suburbs, and that same rail line connects to the middle of Manhattan and also terminates about a mile or so from his office. And so there's literally this line connecting this one life in one place to another life in another place. Think about that. And this home in the suburbs, Rex Heuermann's home, even sticks out amongst the pleasant but ordinary homes there as a ramshackle pigsty. Not only on the outside, but like Heuermann himself, on the inside as well. On the inside, it's also cluttered and messy. And it really is amazing that one moment you're in one place, one world, and because you get on a train, you can doze off or daydream or read a paper or just drift away. And when the train reaches your stop, it's almost like you wake up and you're somewhere else. But are you someone else? And one of the reasons I went to Manhattan was to celebrate some milestones I felt I'd achieved at the time, and also in a way to pay tribute to America, to say thanks for giving me the opportunities I wouldn't otherwise have had. And I remember listening to the sentiments in that Taylor Swift song, Welcome to New York. You know, literally when I entered Manhattan for the first time, I was listening to that song, and I listened to it many, many times. Remember what she sings, everybody here wanted something more. That's true, but I think for the Long Island serial killer, he wanted something in that excruciating way people want things, you know, while also knowing they can never really have them. It's different to want something, to pursue that something and then to achieve it, than to want something and then sort of slowly resign yourself to never ever having it. That can be very, very painful. That kind of exposes your inadequacy. And knowing that you can never really have certain things can lead to feelings of desperation, obsessive feelings, and take you down sort of an addictive path. But coming back to those lyrics, welcome to New York, it's been waiting for you. Obviously, on his commute to work each day, all of those sights and sounds were waiting for him each and every day. But at the same time, when he went home, he left New York behind and returned to his humdrum existence. He returned to this ordinary, sad sack person that he knew himself to be. But that aching lingered, that wanting more feeling lingered, that wish not to be crushed down, beat down, looked down on, laughed at, but instead what he wanted was to tower over, to dominate, to have control of all of this. And there's actually a picture of someone took a photo of Heuermann during the commute where they were actually making fun of him. And one wonders to what extent he was aware of this. And how often was this kind of thing taking place? And how do you feel when you're being made fun of when what you really want is to be part of the stars of the show? And then let's go back to those lyrics. Took our broken hearts, put them in a drawer. Everybody here was someone else before. And you can want who you want, boys and boys and girls and girls. Now, I think Rex Heuermann could only achieve a certain amount of traction amongst other people in terms of his work. A certain limited amount of traction. But he wanted more. He wanted a more visceral sense of power, of domination, of asserting himself, perhaps of connection. And I think it taps into that same base instinct, that same depravity we see in the Epstein files, where you have seemingly powerful figures, incredibly rich individuals, incredibly apparently influential individuals who nevertheless seem to feel overwhelmed by the complexity of the system that we are in, the mega machine, the finitude of our lives, the fact that we're not going to live forever, the fact that we get old and die. And whatever you want to call it, there seems to be a primitive male impulse that feels that the only way to cut through the clutter, this existential angst, is in a sexual sense. But they can't do so based on their own agency, based on their own existence. And so what do? They cheat. Like any true love, it drives you crazy, but you know you wouldn't change anything. There's also lyrics from that same song. And what the Long Island serial killer did was he was being driven crazy, but he didn't really change anything. He'd accepted his fate. And so instead he developed these alter egos, these fictional identities, which mirrors his life, that there's the shadow personality underneath a veneer. And this was where he was going to assert his power. And it was apparently such a rush being able to buy people's lives, finding how disposable people's lives could be, to gain that level of control and power over someone else, that he wanted an even bigger rush. This is the equivalent of a drug addict getting his thrills through sexual adventures, but sexual adventures that include sadism and violence. And so what he wanted was more fear, more control, more power. And eventually that became about extinguishing the lives of others in order to feed into this depraved need for complete control, complete power, complete supremacy over somebody else. And this actually often happens with serial killers. They often get lost in their fantasy worlds for the same reason that they get lost and they become losers in the real world, because they fail to accept themselves or the reality they live in. And so they try to make one up, and they get caught up in that sort of make-believe, in that fantasy. And this is also the difference between a true serial killer and someone like Brian Kohberger, which is the scale of inferiority, the scale of insecurity, the scale of intimidation, the scale of a sense of a lack of control, the scale of humiliation. In the case of the Long Island serial killer, that feeling of humiliation had been there forever, and he had raged against it forever. The difference between the one setting and the other is also incredible. That scale, that scope is also pretty incredible to behold. And so the Long Island serial killer was both potent and impotent to change anything. He could change certain things, but he couldn't change other things. And yet he revels in this contradiction. He starts to make it work in his favor, that he's going to hide behind a mask if people won't accept him the way that he is. In Kohberger's case, and I tried to illustrate this recently in a simplified way, and it seems like 5% of those watching actually clicked, actually got what I was trying to communicate. But it's the same thing we see here. The psychological distance from his empty, bare, lifeless, insecure little apartment in Pullman, which is a representation of who he is, to the vivid, visceral, pumping, vigorous, lively, sexual, social party going on at the funhouse, which is what he wants, the life that he wishes he had, the connection that he aspires to, but can't seem to access. Now, some of you are so determined to be insulted by that term, funhouse, that you're unable to appreciate what it meant to Kohberger and to that whole case. Kohberger didn't commute on a daily basis to the funhouse, but he did make regular visits, and he did begin to fantasize about what he couldn't have in the same way, coming out of a place of weakness, loneliness, anger, resentment, sexual frustration, and then obsessing about this thing that he couldn't have. In sum, he was coveting a world that he could never be part of. And then it was about getting his payback on what was done to him by giving in to that base male impulse, sexual domination, as a way to force back control and imminence. All of this is an attempt to regain control. Now, we are dealing with individuals who lack courage here, and because of this, they seek comfort online and in pornography, and eventually these destructive fantasies take over. It becomes more and more wanting this raw experience, this real experience, and eventually it needs to be more and more compelling, and eventually the only thing that's going to compete with that is reality. Now, the main difference between the Long Island serial killer and the Idaho 4 killer is just the scale of insufficiency, along with the scale of the disconnect between the one world and the other, and then also the paralyzing insufficiency that he decides to overcome. How? With violence. Does that make sense? It does rather beg the question, if one feels impotent in one's life, now think about this in a general sense and perhaps in a personal sense, perhaps even in a private sense. If one feels impotent in one's life, and if one does lack control in one's life, if one does lack social currency in one's life, if one does lack power in this world, how can one realistically regain agency? And maybe that is something for us to think about and talk about in a follow-up episode. So I'm not going to take it further than that, but if you found this interesting and meaningful and you'd like me to go into that into more detail, do let me know in the comments. Thank you for listening. I hope you're having a good weekend, and I'll see you guys next time.